Hello friends, it's good to be with you. I had a variation in my routine today. We've been in isolation due to COVID-19, but as you can see from the background, we're not suffering terribly. It's actually been a lovely time for us. But my routine was varied because I've had a shave and I've actually combed my hair. But this time of life is different to anything that we've ever experienced before. And it reminded us of a story. What was that book?
It was written by the Linns and it was called Sleeping with Bread, Holding What Gives You Life.
And it was about little children in London that had lost their mother and father due to the bombings. And they had gathered them in orphanages all over Britain, but they were really struggling with their losses. They were fearful, they were anxious, they were suffering with PTSD, and they were hungry. And it seemed as if nothing could comfort them. And so when it came to bedtime, it was even worse because they were contemplating going through the night hours. And so what someone decided to do was to take some bread and break it off and give it to them to hold. And as the little kids held on to this bread, they were comforted and they began to sleep through the night because somehow it assured them that they had been hungry in the day, but they had bread and they would have bread tomorrow. That reminds me of a verse in the Bible.
Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. And this is found in John 6, verse 35 and verse 51. He said, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever. I wonder what it means that he is the bread of life. And we're going to sort of think about holding on to bread or sleeping with bread from three different perspectives. And the first one is what is it like when we don't have any bread in our hands? And the second one is what's different when we're actually holding bread in our hands? And the third part is how can we become bread for others? How can we give away what we've been given?
What's it like for you when you don't have bread?
I get quite anxious, and I remember the beginning of COVID-19 when people were dying in Italy at a great rate, and I remember standing in front of my wardrobe, getting dressed in the morning thinking, I may never need these clothes.
Oh, okay.
You know, I could be one of these people that die, that catch COVID and die. And then I began to think, what if I lost you? Or what if you lost me? And what would that be like for our children? And so I became quite anxious about it and the uncertainty of not knowing how this was going to hit our country and if we were going to be like Italy.
It's unusual for you.
Oh, no, it's not.
Because usually that's me that is the anxious, fearful one.
But I get very anxious about relationships and the potential for pain in relationship.
So loss.
Yeah, pain and loss, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, when I think about what it's like when I don't have bread, I go back to when I was a little kid. Even I can remember that I had this special blanket with a satin border on it, and I would hold it and I would just feel the satin, and somehow that comforted me. I have a propensity towards anxiety and fear, more on that end of the scale than the hope and excitement end of the scale. If I was on a 1 to 10, 1 is fearful and anxious and 10 is hopeful, I'd be in the bottom half of that normally.
What sorts of things make you anxious?
Well, finance can make me anxious.
Yeah.
You know, how much is enough? I can get really quite anxious about that question and can ponder on it over a lot of time. It can even wake me up in the middle of the night. When I was in business, sometimes the external forces acting on that business, I could get very anxious about that. If I got a phone call from the tax department saying they were going to investigate a client of one of my clients, I could be very.
I remember those times. Yes.
Yes, they were not
very
pleasant.
all-consuming.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens when we haven't got bread in our hands, is we become very self-focused. and it affects our mental health. That's kind of cycle of negativity that we get into, the rumination, it kind of depletes our systems of serotonin and the chemicals that we need for our well-being. And so there's this vicious cycle that we get into because we ruminate, we get depleted, so we ruminate some more, and then we become very negative. And I've learnt that when I say things like, "Oh, I'm so stressed," or "I'm so overwhelmed," and you know nothing's gone right today, that somehow or other my this little organ in my brain called the amygdala, which is part of my feeling brain, actually listens to that. It listens to my self-talk, and it's almost like self-abuse.
Wow.
Because my amygdala is listening, and pretty soon that becomes me.
Give us an example of the self-talk.
Oh, I feel so overwhelmed all the time. Yeah, I feel so overwhelmed. And I begin to actually believe that I am overwhelmed. Whereas...
So the statement becomes self-fulfilling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can see how that's abusive. Mine tends, I'm sure it's in the emotional area as well, but it tends to manifest itself physically with me. And immediately I get under stress.
Oh, wait a minute, what about emotionally? How does it affect your mental health?
It goes to early messages that I won't be enough. I'll get into an area where I'll feel that I will fail. It seems to attack who I am, how I perceive myself, especially say in a tax investigation. What if I'm wrong? What if I've made a mistake?
So it's that self-talk again, isn't it?
Yep. So why don't I think, oh no, that's okay, I'm good at this and I've done a good job,
and
it'll
why
be
can't
okay.
I just give this to God? Yeah.
Yep. And I'll probably say a little bit more about it. Actually, I can say that now. That in this area, what's it like when I don't have bread, is I'll be in that space between, this is what I believe, the Bible says, Philippians 4:6, don't be anxious. This is what I believe, but what am I experiencing? And there's a gap there, and I tend to live in that gap, and it's unpleasant. It can lead to doubt, and I struggle in that place, and everything in me wants to move away from it. But mostly I would recognise it in my physical being, digestion. You know, I'll have all sorts of trouble with that, and just the digestive process. It can be really...
I've noticed that, yeah.
I can panic over it.
And especially when we're travelling and that, it's a real issue, isn't it?
Yeah, and because the anxiety is manifested there. Yeah. And then the other thing, I take blood pressure medication. My blood pressure can rise very quickly. And I've already mentioned it, my sleep patterns get distorted. I know that, say 3:30, 4 o'clock, I'm awake and my mind is racing. There's no sort of space between awake and race. It just starts immediately.
And for me physically, my muscles get really tight, and I get backaches and hip aches, and then it kind of morphs into a migraine. And so that's when I know that I'm not holding bread in my hands. And for other people, it can lead to, because it depletes your immune system, so it can lead to stroke and heart disease and all sorts of nasty things.
Anxiety is a very powerful force in our lives, and the Bible clearly tells us
don't be anxious.
That's not from God. That's from our enemy. But that's the place that I will naturally go to. I have learned in that space between what I believe and what I'm experiencing, that it's wise for me to go into it, because the way out of doubt and uncertainty is to go in, not to flee away from it or to leave it, but to actually embrace it and go toward it. But the way out is the way in. Sounds really good when I say it like that. But, you know, what is different when we're actually holding bread in our hands? So I'm going to give you a piece of bread
Thank
for you to hold in your hands, and you share with me Well, what's different when you're holding bread in your hand?
I'm able to let things go. That would be the broad sweep. And I have two ways that I do that. And recently with the COVID-19, I really tried to do these two things. And one of them is that I have a God box. I call it my God trust box. And I have beside it a little booklet that I tear out the pages and write them in. And I put what's bothering me in the box, and then I pray the verse, Psalm 55:21. And this is my version of that verse. Cast your burden upon the Lord, releasing the weight of it, and he will sustain you. He will never allow the consistently righteous to be moved, made to slip, fall, or fail. And so, you know, those things I worry about, slipping, falling, or failing, he's already taken care of it, and he's not going to allow that to happen. And that really touches me deeply, that he cares that much.
I can see that. Where do you keep the little box?
I keep it in beside my computer upstairs, where my desk is.
Am I allowed to go into the box?
Yeah, sure, anytime. I got no secrets.
I check out what's troubling you. What if I go in there and I find out it's me?
Wow, we'll have another conversation.
Okay.
The other thing that's really helped me is that John Eldridge has an app called Pause, and I listen to that before I go to sleep at night. And he says, cast your cares and worries on the Lord, and then what do you need to let go of? And so I name those things very specifically that I need to let go of before I fall asleep, and I give them over to God, and that really helps me. So what about you? I'm going to give you a piece of bread to hold. What is it like when you're holding bread in your hands?
Do you know what it's like for me is that over a lot of my Christian life, my prayer life has been transactional. I know that I need to do it. It's that belief and what am I experiencing. And in more recent time, my prayer life has become relational. It's not transactional. I have a growing confidence that God is answering my prayer. It may not be immediately, it may not be tomorrow, but he will answer it, and I will recognise it when it comes. And it may not be the way I think it should be, but I'll know that his hand is in the answer. And it's given me a sense of confidence.
I've actually noticed the difference in you as you've grown more into that, and you're actually lighter and happier.
I am, and it's interesting. Usually with COVID-19, I would tend to be anxious, but I haven't felt anxious about it this time. Maybe if I still had the business, I might be very anxious because it has attendant issues with it. But at this stage, that's the lovely thing that I'm finding out when I hold bread. There's like when I wake up in the morning, it's not something that is compulsory that I have to do. My heart just leaps to it. I just say, "Good morning, Lord," and I look out the window to see what sort of day He's going to give me.
And it's raining now.
Yeah. So it's just a lovely time of life for me and my relationship with God. So that's what it's like when I'm holding bread. But the other thing that I found, and it came from a question that you asked me, we were talking the other day about a friend of mine that I just entered into a bit of an email conversation with him because during the coronavirus isolation, he's my age, I sense he's very angry that God should not have allowed this to happen. People are suffering, and it is that age-old question of suffering. What do I do with this? And so I just entered into a bit of an email conversation with him, but it's not something that I normally do, and I'm wanting to pull out of it. I don't want to go any further. I don't want to engage with him. And you asked me, what's that about? And I think of 2 Corinthians 1:4, where Paul says, well, you comfort others with what you're being comforted with. And so this man is needing comfort. Probably doesn't know it, and he probably doesn't understand what he's angry about. But I have a sense of what he is angry about. And it's that place where I've been in the past, where I've been confronted with something that I consider unjust. It's just wrong. It should not have happened. And I can remember happened in Sri Lanka, I can remember being incredibly angry with God and just muttering to him all the time and being in a hard place, discontent, cynical, didn't want to pray, didn't want to do any of those things. And I can remember the despair of that place and what it felt like. And what I see in my friend is he is in that place. But in order for me to be able to give him bread, I need to go to that place in me and go into his life and be present to him in his pain. I can't fix it. That's God's job. But I can be with him. And I recognise that my reluctance was that I did not want to go to that place in me.
And I'm kind of wondering what it would be like to remember that place in you, but to go there from where you are now with him, what difference that would make.
I would go without being fearful, without being anxious. I would go with the bread of life, confident in the knowledge that God is able to comfort me, and therefore he is able to comfort me. There are no special exceptions. God is able to comfort all that come to him. And so for me, the challenge in this area of life is to be able to take the bread that I have been given and give it to others.
Wow, and Jesus set an example of that, didn't he?
We do.
Because when he was about to be killed and by the religious leaders of his day, and he was about to be betrayed in the garden, and he took the cup, and he took the bread, and he broke the bread, didn't he? He broke the bread. And he gave it to others and said, "This is my body, which is broken for you." And he gave his life away.
So in a sense, he was like those orphans. He was facing tremendous trauma, tremendous tragedy, tremendous pain. And he knew what was before him. And even in that moment, he was able to take his life and give it to others. And because of that, you and I are sitting here and we have bread.
And the thankfulness the thankfulness to that, for that grace, and the fact that we have actually been able to give our bread away to others across the world. There's no greater joy than that. That's pretty neat.
The bread of life that nourishes us, and we're able to give it away to others to nourish them.
So what we'd like you to think about today is what is it like for you when you don't have bread in your hands, when your hands are empty? And what makes you anxious and fearful? And then what is it like for you to hold bread in your hands? And if you've never actually held bread in your hands, what needs to happen for you to break that bread and hold it in your hands, the bread of life? And then how can you become bread for others? How can you give your life away? Bless you all. We love you. Bye.
I just might say one thing there. It's easy to hear those words and to think, yes, I can do that. But can I encourage you to speak to someone that's close to you?
That's a good.
Because it just helps you to formulate it and digs it out. You noticed in that little story about my friend that Paula's question to me enabled me to find out, to go in order to find the way out. Can we leave that with you? Goodbye.
Bless you.